The Midwest was formed by explorers, those who were willing to risk everything to see a better future. While our lands are still rich with agriculture, we are more than just flyover country. Our former cow towns are now business hubs and technology innovators. On this show, we tell the stories of folks marketing in the middle. This is the Midwest Marketing Show. All right, welcome to the Midwest Marketing Show. I have an awesome guest today. I saw him present at the Social Media Club of Kansas City event, and I'm excited because you are also a JJ, as I am, and your name has two first names on each side, and so you get the lifelong problem of, is your name Jake or Jacob? Or I get Jeff or Julian all the time. So it's great to have you on the show. We'll see if we can get 4Js going here. But you've had an amazing career. It was great watching LinkedIn and seeing the progression and seeing that move from Kansas City Star, then to Garmin. That was a huge shift. And then to Children's Mercy. Those are completely different mindsets, but they have a very similar need and interest, especially when it comes to public relations. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that journey and how you came to be the senior manager of public relations at Children's Mercy.
Sure. So it's funny because when people ask me about it, it always sounds more jarring than it felt at the time. So when I moved down to Kansas City in 2000, took a job at the Kansas City Star, I was working in the sports department as a copy editor and designer. And I was like, you get to focus on sports 24/7. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then they needed some new leadership in the newsroom. Morale was a bit low. And everybody there works nights, weekends, holidays. So it's a pretty thankless job on the copy desk. So they asked me if I would kind of take over that copy desk. And I loved that because at that point, I enjoyed the newspaper side, but at that point it was more about helping these 20 people who were great journalists and great people enjoy life a little bit more.
Yeah.
And so I really got a kick out of that. So I did that for about 3 years. But during that time, I was also realizing that my own hours were stretching a bit, and in trying to make everybody else's life a little better, I was killing myself slowly.
Yeah,
Somebody told me I aged 10 years in 2 years that I was doing that, which isn't good. And also at that time, my wife, who I met at the Star, so that was absolutely worth it.
Yeah.
She was working days, I was working nights. We were only seeing each other on Sundays, and that's not a great way to be married or to be 30.
Yeah.
And so I started looking around a little bit, and Garmin had this PR position for their expanding markets for fitness and outdoor. And so I bugged them. I think I called them every day for a couple of weeks, finally got an interview, went in, just clicked, and it was a great fit. And so I went from this job that was kind of unhealthy lifestyle, horrible hours, but great people and great awareness of Kansas City, to this job where I was running, hiking, and biking for a living. And so
that would be awesome.
It was pretty great. Yeah, within my first few months, I was running Chicago Marathon on 10 weeks training, which I'm going to do again in a couple weeks.
Really?
Yeah, so I'll be doing Chicago again. It'll be a fun little flashback.
Yeah.
And my training hasn't improved. But then, my second summer there, I'm going to the Tour de France, running New York Marathon. And so it was great. And what I loved about it was this immersion into the outdoor and fitness world. But also that opened a new door where when I was over at the Tour de France, there's not a lot of Wi-Fi in rural France, especially back in 2008.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm over there and I'm supposed to be blogging. I'm supposed to be on email all the time. And there's nowhere to get Wi-Fi. And so one of the guys on the cycling team just asked me, he's like, hey, have you ever tried Twitter? And at this time, I thought Twitter was all about, what you had for lunch or, hey, what's everyone doing? Silence, because no one else is on Twitter.
Exactly.
But because mass media doesn't follow cycling very well, it became this great way to broadcast and market cycling. And so I like to joke that Garmin's Twitter account was born in the backseat of a van at the 2008 Tour de France. Yeah. And so that kind of grew and grew until suddenly I had two full-time jobs on top of each other. The traditional PR for outdoor and fitness, and this growing social media space. And so my boss was great, gave me the option to choose, do I go with what I had been calling my dream job or a job I created, kind of my baby? And so I chose my baby because I couldn't picture anyone else having that voice. So I did social media full-time for about 3 years there. And again, it was great growing in those communities, focusing on helping, and teaching. And I really got a charge out of that, especially because this was back when it wasn't expected for brands to be on Twitter, especially. And so when people would ask questions, like, oh, my watch is broken, and I would respond and say, how can I help? They would immediately reply and say, wow, you guys are the best. I haven't even fixed their watch at this point, but just that somebody answered. And so that was really fulfilling. So I was at Garmin for about 6 years, and during that time started getting more involved around Kansas City and looking for ways to kind of give back to the city and be able to raise Kansas City's profile at the same time that I'm doing work. And job came open at Children's Mercy. They had just announced, this new genome center, this new technology that could sequence a baby's DNA in 50 hours. They were on the front page of Time, front page of New York Times, Wall Street Journal. It was huge. And it was a huge day for Kansas City. But they didn't really have the bandwidth. I mean, they had a 2-person PR team total for a 7,000-person institution. And so they wanted someone who could do national PR. And when they asked me if I wanted to share Children's Mercy and Kansas City stories on a national level, that's tough to turn down. And it was pretty cool when I was leaving. Even people are just like, I can't believe you're leaving Garmin. That, dream job. You're Jake from Garmin. And then like, where are you going? And I'd say Children's Mercy, and everyone to a person was just like, oh, of course, makes sense. So now I get to share stories once again, but now I do it I wear 3 hats, which helps because I have a big head, with national PR, social media, and then community engagement, just kind of sharing our stories around town. So that's the thread. Kind of makes sense to me.
Oh, no, it does. And I love it because...
And it gave me a nice rounded, perspective of the city, of a lot of different spaces, and introduced me to a lot of great people.
Oh, I love you have the background of pulling a team together at the Star and then building up a national and international presence at Garmin. Because I was one of the audience members during that time period. I was a Nuvi user early on when the devices finally hit the stickable window piece, but then I got into Forerunner, and I've got a 620 right now. And
that's what was cool, was that whole idea of, not only getting to do something that I loved, because I'd always been a runner, even though when I met the Runner's World guys, they were like, oh, which marathons have you done? I was like, oh, I haven't done, like, oh, so you're not a distance runner, which is how I got talked into doing Chicago on 10 weeks training. But it really was this idea, and the company still believes in that you should absolutely have this passion for those markets that you serve. So that when I would go to the New York Marathon Expo, they knew that I was going to be lining up and doing the marathon the next day with them. Or our aviation folks were the same people who also had their pilot's license. So it's great to hear that, because that was definitely a goal.
You see that in and out of Garmin. The marine people are definitely avid fishers, and you see that, they're out at tournaments fishing. And
absolutely.
I think Garmin is an excellent example of how businesses can grow in Kansas City. But Children's Mercy, it has been, as a parent, one of those staples in our town that would make me wonder, if I was leaving the city, where I would find the support that I found at Children's Mercy. Because the doctors are amazing, the people are amazing, the atmosphere is amazing. My son went in for surgery this year, and we were in the PICU. And that's not a place you want to be. It's like one of the worst places in that hospital you can stay the night. But the nurses, the atmosphere, it didn't feel like the traditional ICU. And then when my daughter swallowed a battery, we brought her in, and they scoped it out, and the doctor lost sleep over it because it was so severe. And he was constantly coming in and providing information to us and helping these scared parents that had no idea what was happening next, and just going above and beyond what most doctors will do. And you just get that from Children's Mercy.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And I've worked with a lot of great teams. This is hard to beat, and for that point, Dr. Wardy, who's in charge of our nephrology division, so kidney dialysis and all that, he gets invited to his patients' weddings because, he's with them from birth or an early age all the way through the time they transition out at age 21. And one woman who was getting married had Dr. Wardy come to the wedding and said, next to my father, you are the most important man in my life.
Wow.
And he knows them all. He goes to camp with them, and we have 700 subspecialists, 7,000 employees totally. All we do is focus on kids. And so I always say, I'm like, I don't know that I could do this at a grown-up hospital because it's not the same vibe. And that's nothing against, I mean, we have amazing grown-up hospitals around town. But for me, I mean, I get that drive from walking the halls, seeing the kids, getting to know the families, getting to share their stories, which is an immense responsibility as I get to meet these families and say, all right, I'm going to tell your story responsibly, and I'm going to do it in a way that inspires and encourages others, and I'm going to do it right without being exploitative. And then suddenly I become part of that family, and it's hugs next time I go to the hospital and see them. But then you also are just like, oh, you're here again.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, you know, you almost want to say, it was nice meeting you. I hope I never see you again.
Oh, exactly.
You know? But then when you do, they're back, and we hear so often, especially around the holidays, like kids don't want to go home sometimes because they're like, this is such a fun place.
Yeah.
And so if we can make that, and if we can take that little bit of burden off, I mean, that's why music therapy, child life, all those things that are unique to a children's hospital, those are the things that I get a charge out of. So I can't imagine, you know, and I'm just there working.
Oh, yeah.
So, it's a pretty special place, and Kansas City's lucky to have it. And I'm lucky to be able to tell our story on a national level and let people get to know about it. And what's cool is hearing from people, like when we did Inside Pediatrics, this documentary series, having people from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco, which they have plenty of great children's hospitals themselves, call us and say, wow, something magical is happening at Children's Mercy. Tell me about it.
Yeah.
And then you start to realize, like, all right, we're letting people know. And there's a practical side, too. I mean, obviously, great stories. But to your point, we want families to know that this amazing care for everything from routine asthma and flu all the way up to these very complex cases. I mean, I sat in on a deep brain neurosurgery for epilepsy seizures. And these are things that you would normally think, oh, I probably have to go to one of the coasts. Or I have to go to Mayo. I have to go somewhere else. But that's so disruptive to a family that we want to keep families at home, you know, and so to be able to do that here, and not to go into all marketing spiel, but that's what gives me a charge about working there.
Absolutely.
Is that you realize you're improving people's quality of life, not just that immediate care, but you're also helping take a lot of the burden off and a lot of the stress off.
I know there's several key areas that you guys just hit. The family care with Ronald McDonald House.
Yes.
And I mean, even it's weird because we want to have smoke-free campuses, but putting that smoking station across the street, when you're dealing with a problem, man, and you smoke, it's hard to leave your kid, but then to walk 3 blocks down the road to do that,
right?
It's hard. It's even harder.
Yeah.
So just giving them a place to kind of get their bearings. You guys have done such a great job. But
thanks.
So what does this day-to-day life, walking through the hospital and interacting with people, what is that like for you?
So it's always interesting, and I know it sounds like cliche, but there is no typical day. But my day in general usually revolves around, you know, we have a good site. Well, I mean, small for a 7,000 person company, so to speak. But we have a team of kind of rock stars in our communications and marketing. And so there's a lot of work amongst ourselves. So like I work with our web team to make sure that, you know, we're hosting a Twitter chat later this morning. Oh, wow. And I wanted to make sure that we've got updated information about that. But then also with our internal communications team, if we have a great media hit, I want to make sure that they know about it so they can share it with our employees because, and we'll talk about this later, but that idea of getting employees excited about sharing what's good about your organization. So we have a great internal comms team. Now, is that my job? No. But does it overlap with my job? Every day. And so I work with them quite a bit, going and meeting with the doctors and finding out, hey, what notable cases are you having? You know, we used to start off those conversations with, we're looking for great families. Like, oh, wait, all of them are great families. We're surrounded by great families. But what are some noteworthy cases that might, you know, draw attention with media? Who could we help spotlight? So working with them, getting to meet the families and, you know, gaining their trust and saying, all right, I'm here with you. Whether it was filming that documentary or even just sharing their story through the media, we always say, if at any time you decide that you'd rather keep this private, let me know and we're out. You know, and so I love working with journalists, and that's the other key stakeholder that I'm always, you know, getting calls from journalists. I focus mostly on national. I've got a great teammate who does local and regional. But we get, 5 or 6 local media requests a day. Yeah. And while I love working with them, my first priority is protecting our parents. Yeah. And so if somebody's calling and wanting information that my parents aren't required to give and aren't comfortable giving, then we don't give it. You know, and so And part of that is long-term relationships too, and the journalists know that. That I will absolutely help you when I can, but at this time, this family was just in a house fire last night. Today's not the day for an interview.
Yeah.
So it's kind of those different areas. And now that I'm on the community engagement side as well, it's finding, opportunities to go interact with different organizations that we're either partners with, or that just, would be a good opportunity for us to share a story. Literally it's finding good stories, telling good stories, and finding the best place and vehicle to tell them.
Yeah. So to speak of those kind of interactions, you guys are instrumental in the Big Slick Celebrity Weekend, and every year it just keeps getting bigger and bigger because we have a few local actors,
right?
Like Paul Rudd and Rob Riggle and Jason Sudeikis.
Yep.
And they kind of wanted to do a poker tournament, right, to raise money for Children's Mercy.
They did, yes. That was 6 years ago now, which is crazy because I remember, hearing about it before I worked at Children's Mercy. I'm like, that sounds, like Disneyland comes to Kansas City, I mean, that's a lot of glitz, and so Rob got the idea. He was at another fundraiser where they were, for lack of better words, putting words in his mouth. And he was kind of like, well, I'm a pretty funny guy. I think I could do this. And he's like, but let's do it. And he loves Children's Mercy, reaches out to Paul and Jason, and they both said, absolutely, we're in. They reached out to friends of theirs. And those first couple of years were when, John Hamm would come, and they would get Will Ferrell, and then they were coming to the Royals games and kind of cheering everybody on. So it was good high visibility. And then David Keckner and Eric Stonestreet, who are also local boys, got involved. And so now for the last couple of years, they've been co-hosts as well. The thing that people don't realize is that they do all of that. Like those 5 celebrities and their family and friends, I mean, their families are amazing. Gloria Rudd does a ton of the work, just family, friends. They do all of that volunteer basis, and they let us be a part of it. So it's not our marketing team driving it. It's not our social media team driving it. They have volunteer social media folks who I work closely with, or volunteer PR folks who I work closely with, but they drive that. And I think my favorite part is I had somebody recently ask me, so which of the 5 is the biggest diva? And I was like, no, they're all really cool. They're all really genuine guys. Like, but if you had to pick one, which is the biggest diva? And I couldn't, and not even trying to be PC, but we have the press conference, which turns into more of a stand-up routine than anything. And they're just riffing off each other, and it's hilarious. And later you'll hear them say that they talk about how these guys make each other laugh so hard that why wouldn't they sit there and play? And then the cameras go away, and we spend a ton of time with the kids, and that's when these guys are on. That's when they are absolutely lit up. A couple years ago, Angela Kinsey from The Office, Angela, was in town but missed the shuttle from the hotel to the hospital. But she comes to see the kids. All the rest of the stuff, the bowling, the bocce, the big gala, that's all great. She comes to see the kids. She took a cab herself to come, no makeup, hair pulled back, just wearing a sweatshirt. And I bump into her and I'm like, oh gosh, hey, hello, Angela.
I know you.
And she's just like, I never miss this. And so that's what I think is cool, is that they keep the focus on the kids. We did poker for 4 years. The last 2 years we've done bowling and bocce, and a lot of people are like, oh boy, it's going to drop off with that. But the cool part is doing it out at Pinstripes, the kids can be there. You can't take the kids to the casino.
No.
Or you shouldn't. And, maybe that's more. But they get to be out there, and these guys are out bowling with these sponsors, and it gives the sponsors more face time with the celebs. But every time a family comes through, the celebrities just stop everything, and it's like the Red Sea parting. And they're like, yep, bring them over here. Hey, how are you doing? Let's meet. Let's talk. It's just undivided attention. And that's where you realize just how pure their intentions are. That, in fact, last year, Jake Tapper from CNN was here, and he was looking around. He's like, where's the paparazzi? He's like, you have 20 A-list celebrities here. Where is everybody? I was like, that's not why we do it. And he was like, thank God, because if you did it for any other reason, now this year Selena Gomez was here. And so there were a lot of little, teen magazines that ran pictures, which I don't mind as the PR guy. But we also are just like, we don't want to denigrate it to the point where it just becomes prop ups and smiles. And instead it's like, this is time with the kids. And then that led to, when we started doing this documentary, we asked Paul, it's like, hey, would you mind doing the voiceover for Inside Pediatrics? Not only does he say yes, but he takes time out of filming a little movie called Ant-Man.
Yeah.
And so he found time while filming Ant-Man to do it. And the time that he had allotted for it was taken up by the Royals World Series. Yeah. And so he comes home to do that, but he comes home and does the World Series, still finds time to donate his time to do the voiceover for our series. And it just made it. Like, it was, we already had these great stories, but his voice was the glue.
Yeah.
Especially when in the final episode you see Big Slick happening and you're just like, oh, this is why, you know? So anyway, I could go on.
Oh, so let's talk
Big
about
Slick,
the documentary.
Yeah.
So how did that come about? Because when you get on a large, TV screen in a documentary, that's lots of prep, lots of video crews, lots of, I'm sure, waivers and things that are flying around. What was that like for your team, and how did that come about?
So the idea was, how do we tell, like, the last couple of years we've, in our ads, focused more on telling our kids real stories. Mm-hmm. Not just composite characters, not just anecdotal, but finding a handful of kids and telling their real story. Mm-hmm. And it was so impactful that we're like, all right, well, how can we do that on a bigger scale? Because we have so many great stories to tell. So there is a company out of St. Louis called Coolfire. And so they had done some of these documentary series. They do a lot of reality TV work. And they came and met with us. They fell in love with the hospital. We liked what they would do. And the idea was absolutely make it authentic, and we're not going to have anybody stage anything. We're not going to have people, redo procedures, which would be ridiculous. Yeah. And so they came in and said, we'll be a fly on the wall. And they sat through surgeries for 13 weeks last summer, and again this summer. They sat through and filmed 28 different families, and then processed those stories. And what came out, even for those of us who literally sat there while it was filming, was tear-jerking. You know, and then you see it, and it's just a really cool way. And every family we approached, because we were kind of worried, well, some people, and we didn't just cherry pick. Like, there were a couple that were high-risk pregnancies that nobody expected to make out of the delivery room. And when we asked them about it, while they were still, waiting to deliver, they're like, absolutely. And every time we said, if this gets too deep, if this gets too sad, tell us. And not only will we stop, we'll destroy all the film. Yeah. Those two families stuck with us the whole time, to the point where we're even going to have an update on them in the second season. But then we had our big kickoff party where we celebrated all those families. All of the families came together, and it was hugs, and it was as if, and you mentioned Ronald McDonald House. Mm-hmm. A lot of those families got to know each other at Ronald McDonald House, because it is such a great place. Right, exactly. And so you see these families coming together, and every one of them feels stronger, because not only do they have the best scrapbook ever, but they all realized that when we shared their stories through social, you would see 20 more families come out and say, my baby had that 5 years ago. Oh, I'm a proud cleft parent too, Yeah. And then they're just emboldened by that. And so it was the most rewarding experience. So we decided, all right, let's do it again. Oh, yeah. And so we filmed another, set of families this summer, and this December we'll air it again on KMBC. And we're just excited to share it because it gives people a glimpse of what we do. We like to say the great thing is almost everybody in Kansas City loves us. Yeah. And you ask around, people love Children's Mercy, and they love us without even knowing what we do. Yeah. So what if we actually show them what we do and kind of blow their minds with these complex surgeries that only a handful of places in the country can do? Mm-hmm. And now they're not only loving us with their heart, but with their head, And then it was cool because, we are a nonprofit, and so since we opened our doors 118 years ago, we've been a nonprofit. We never turn kids away. And so it's never an idea of how are you going to pay? It's how can we help? Mm-hmm. But we didn't want this to feel like a Sarah McLachlan commercial. We didn't want it to be like an infomercial where you're sitting there at the end asking for money and just showing, sad babies so that you can ask for money. So there was no ask in it. Yeah. And yet we still saw donations spike. We saw application spike. Our HR group said that we see this huge spike in December based on Inside Pediatrics. So it really, for everything that we hoped it would achieve, it did that and then more some. So it was a great result, but it was a lot of work. Oh, you're right. We consented everybody that appears on camera. Yeah. So I think it's 500 or 600 consent forms. It was on top of an already busy. It happened during Big Slick. Yeah. And so it was a busy stretch. and you're working hard, but everybody around you is working even harder. And then this is what always gets me is then you go to that, because we're in Crown Center is where our office is, but we're at the hospital daily. Then you go to the hospital, and that's where the real work is being done. It's like, all right, my email, my inbox is not real work.
Yeah.
This is real work. So I think I can knock it out.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a pretty cool project, and probably one of the proudest things I've been a part of.
Yeah, I mean, just you guys are motivating other people to share their stories, and when people see kind of what's in the documentary, it makes you want to get the awareness out
Right.
that, hey, this could happen to you. Here's kind of some of the signs and pieces out of it. Just this week, it's the 4-year anniversary of my daughter's battery swallow, and I keep the battery, and they gave it to me, and so I put it upstairs on my desk, and I posted about it. And there's still not enough information out there about these Iron Man pills that kids swallow because they're shiny and
they look like a vitamin.
Yeah, they look like a vitamin.
Yep.
And so it just makes you want to drive awareness and keep pushing, and that's why you're getting all those consent forms, because people are like, if I'm going through this, I want to help somebody else's.
Right. And I think that was what amazed me, was that everyone saw that as the value, and that everyone saw, if I can teach another family what it's like to have a baby born with half a heart, to have a baby who has to have 2 surgeries before they turn 1. If I can teach other families that it's not the end of the world, and oh my gosh, look at this adorable Winston now, then you're able to empower a lot of people. It makes you feel pretty good.
Yeah. So one of the things that you talked about at SMKC when you became the Trailblazer of the Year for your award, and I love that one for you guys because you've definitely done it well, was working with physicians and sharing stories and recruiting team members, because it's all intentional, but it doesn't come across as forced.
Right.
So how do you interact with physicians, because they're a close part of my family, and I understand that. When you get the 4 a.m. calls, when you hear the phone ring, you know that, I'm going to hear a loud voice in just a second. And it's very hard to get on their radar. So what's it like?
So I think part of it is I haven't tried to twist anybody's arm. And I've been very, very pleased with, I get more requests from people wanting to do it, wanting to learn more about it, than me having to approach people and say, this is really important, I need you to do this. Because if I do approach somebody and they're not interested, I could spend a lot of time trying to make them do it.
Yeah.
But when they do it, whether it's a Twitter chat or whatever, they're probably not going to enjoy it, and it'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy. At that point, I've got 5 other doctors who are asking me about it, but they're just curious, they're a little unsure. I was like, all right, well, if I spend that amount of time instead of convincing, teaching, and kind of going over here and asking, and it's not like everybody gets the automatic green flag either. Like there are some people who just be like, we need a Twitter account. I'm like, do we? Let's talk about it. What are we trying to achieve? And it's like, oh, we're just trying to talk to this small group. All right, well, maybe, an e-blast, because you already know which 50 families you're talking to. Maybe that makes more sense to start the conversation that way. But for more of our widespread things like, asthma, allergies, today's focused on pain disorders. So these kids who have these mysterious pains that keep propping up that hurt their exercise, school, and sleep, those doctors approach me. And I even said, I was like, well, let's cool our jets for a second. Let's think this through, because if we open this up, it's going to be some work. I don't have the bandwidth to do it, so it has to be somebody on your team. I don't have the expertise to talk about, whatever subspecialty we're talking about, so it has to be someone on your team. That already will start to weed some people out, and not weed some people out in a bad way, but I might just tell them, all right, well, what if your goal is to get more information out there, but you don't want to own your own channel? Send me stuff. I'll post it through the main Children's Mercy account, and we can tell it to tens of thousands of people instead of 0. I was like, because if we start a new Facebook page today, you will have 0. But if we say it through Children's Mercy, you'll have 45,000. And so I think that's where just education, and I don't think I've had anybody who fought me on recommendations. It just took a little bit of conversation to bring it out. And so it's that idea of figuring out, what are you trying to say? Who are you trying to say it to? And that's classic communication. That's not just social media, but how do we say it? And in some ways, it's like the people who say that we should have a press release for every time you do anything good. It's like at some point you become the spam button. And so we talk about this, and then sometimes it really is, oh wow, you have thought this through, and we do need a Breathe KC Twitter account for asthma, which we now have. We post daily pollen count, and people really appreciate that service.
Yeah.
And that way they're not having to go check our website, so we're spoon feeding it to them. But no, otherwise, it also helps that these guys feel passionate about getting this information out there. Like you talk about the awareness about the batteries. I mean, each of these doctors has a passion for their area, and they find out, it's like, oh, if I do this interview, this afternoon, I'm doing an interview with Time Magazine with one of our doctors, and they're super busy.
Yeah.
But they were the ones who said, block off an hour for my time so that I'm not rushed. Absolutely. One of our doctors, our heart surgeon, who, again, does, I think, 500 heart surgeries a year.
Wow.
So, I mean, the guy is busy.
Yeah.
And we were having a media training, and Dr. O'Brien's already a great spokesperson. But I was having a media training for some of the top doctors around the hospital, and his admin shoots me a note the day before and says, Dr. O'Brien's going to be in surgery from 3 a.m. until 3 p.m. that day, and it's a Friday. And I was like, well, then tell him to go home afterward.
Yeah.
I'm like, he doesn't need to come to this. And so I gave him as many outs as possible. Sure enough, 3 p.m., I started this media training, and Dr. O'Brien's seat is empty. And I was like, good. He went the smart way.
Yeah.
3 minutes in, he walks in, still full scrubs, apologizes for being late, sits down, and afterward I was like, dude, you sleep, go home, And he was like, no, this is important to the hospital, it's important to me, and it's important to you, so I wanted to be here. I'm like, you're a good dude,
Yeah.
And so I think that's just it, is all of the doctors that I work with are just amazing people who also are passionate about this great area, and so, I haven't had to recruit. I haven't had to twist, or convince or coerce, because I think that if I had done that, it would have been futile, because then, and again, there's a couple who have told me, I'm not interested in Twitter. I'm like, great, thank you. Let me know if you ever have any questions, and then I move on.
Yeah.
So I don't shame them, but I also don't tell them that Twitter will solve all their problems.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and then on the recruiting side, you do some cool stuff by telling stories, and then you've also got several layers underneath physicians, or not necessarily underneath, maybe on the side.
Right.
Because everyone is important.
Yep.
At the hospital, from the people who clean the floors to the nursing staff to the physicians to the guys who are switching out the lights.
Right.
And so what is that like with social?
So that part of it is there's a couple different levels, I guess, to it. Like, one is to make social media meaningful to them. Like, again, if somebody's just like, I don't know what Twitter is, but I should probably be on it. Well, let me teach you about why, your families are on there, and again, let me make it meaningful in a way that you can relate to. And at this point, maybe you do want to start, even if it's your own personal one that all you do is lurk. Somebody asked me one time, they were just like, well, I don't really have anything to say. I'm like, well, then don't.
Yeah.
You don't have to. But even just being aware of what your peers are doing will bring you into that conversation. So just trying to make it meaningful to them, that's kind of the first step, because now they have a voice to it. The other one, make it easy, and so a lot of times if we have really big news, or if we're just announced, a big name for Big Slick, or our first heart transplant, that was a great example where I packaged it up and I emailed it out to all of our leadership at the hospital. Then they disseminated it through. I emailed it to that internal comms team. They posted it on our intranet and said, if you want to help share the news about Hannah's heart transplant, here's how. And with a click, I'm not asking them to come up with a tweet on their own. I'm not asking them, I'm like, but if they want to, obviously, they can tweak it however they want. But if all you want to do is show that you're proud of what we did today, here's a quick way to retweet, share, or like. And so I joke that it's spoon-fed social. Like, I'm not even going to make you go to Twitter. I will deliver the link to you.
Exactly. You click,
so all you have to do is click and you're good, And then the other one, I think, is, and this is kind of more for empowering people outside, is that idea of making it memorable. If I tell you a bunch of facts and figures, you'll be like, wow, big numbers. Then you walk out of here and you don't really remember anything. If I tell you about the time that we did a national story about a kid with aplastic anemia who threw out the first pitch of a Major League Baseball game 1,800 miles away using Google Fiber and a robot, and before that day, he didn't have a match for bone marrow transplant, and after that day, he had a perfect match, and now he's gone from not being able to be around crowds to throwing out the first pitch at Kauffman Stadium himself. That's an amazing story.
Yeah.
that will probably resonate more. Maybe you're walking out of here being, man, had kind of a cool chat with Jake today. And did you know?
Yeah.
And suddenly you're doing it that way. And so I think part of my job is to take all of this complex stuff that we do at the hospital and boil it down to an anecdote or two, that if I'm at the Chamber of Commerce annual dinner and I meet somebody and I tell them something I'm excited about, that I might be able to get them excited about it. And then they realize not only is Children's Mercy doing cool stuff, but here's a cool example. So yeah, it's just, I don't know, it kind of boiled down to making it meaningful, easy, and memorable.
Yeah.
And then people want to share it.
I love it. I mean, you said heart transplant, and that went in and kind of settled down, and just doing the back with the minute you said Hannah's heart, that stuck.
That's
and
Hannah.
I will
Yeah.
remember Hannah's heart associated with the heart transplant.
Yeah.
It's memorable.
Yeah.
You're awesome at this, man. So we have a section called the threes, and I give guests the ability to give 3 tips or insights. And then based on your presentation, what are 3 ways you can empower your influencers and your team to sing your praises? Kind of like what you just talked about. If I'm in a business that, we have a team that might not be very interactive with our content, or even in a hospital setting, we've got 7,000 people who are part of the daily mission. What are 3 tips that I can do to get started right away?
Sure. And that's kind of where I was going with the meaningful, easy, and memorable. But I think you can also expand that to be just like, first of all, you have to make it personal. If I'm sharing this story because I work for XYZ Inc. and I'm supposed to, and I have to, it comes out in the delivery, And so I think part of it is to make it personal, make it a passion. And I know it's a pipe dream to say that everybody in the world is going to do a job that they're passionate about, but find the part of that job that is a passion for you. Like you mentioned, the guys cleaning the halls. We have, hospitals are a prime for infection. There's always a chance of infection. So you need to have the cleanest facilities possible. So our facility services team, which is the biggest team at the hospital actually, they focus 100% on do no harm, and so even though they are, quote, just janitors, they are often the thing keeping these kids healthy, making sure they don't get sicker. And so right there, they find their passion. And so every time we celebrate this idea of, wow, isn't Children's Mercy this immaculate palace? That's their pat on the back, And so I think it is finding ways to recognize everybody, not just the one star of the story, but finding ways to make it personal for each person. Then also I think to find, the character, like to find those people who may not be your CEO, but might be your product designer that had a really cool idea and a really cool perspective because that hit them while they were in Seattle looking at, some piece of architecture, and they brought that home and put it into product design. Tell that story, and I think that's where a lot of companies fall short, is they feel like if they're going to have a spokesperson, so to speak, either has to be PR or it has to be a C-level. And it's like, there's really cool people all around you. So find that person and tell that story. Like our Child Life team, I'm always sharing their stories because they're the ones who bring in the superheroes. They're the ones who bring in volunteer bingo. They're the ones who, we have 2 facility dogs, these beautiful golden retrievers that spend time with our cancer patients at the main campus and our epilepsy kids at South. And there's someone's job is to be in charge of those facility dogs and make sure that they are the best companions possible. What a great story to share.
Yeah.
Now is that person the highest paid or the highest profile person at the hospital? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But as soon as people see that we take such care in telling her story, well, then they're going to realize that out of our 7,000 colleagues, we have 7,000 amazing stories. Yeah. So that's
2.
Okay, I've got a third one. I think the other part would be, and this kind of goes along with the passion, but the idea of having fun, of weaving it into the community is another big part. There are a lot of places around town that I think would tell you, well, we're not a Kansas City company, we're a global company, or we're not we're not just Kansas City, because they feel like they're shrinking themselves. Yeah. What I would say is that you have 2 million potential cheerleaders and advocates in this town. And so, Burns and Mac is a great example. A lot of what Burns and Mac does are, 4-syllable words that I can't string together and I wouldn't know to read their annual report from anything. but I know they're a great corporate citizen.
Yeah.
So that makes me want to cheer for Burns and Mac. Black and Veatch is another thing where they do a ton of international business, but they are intensely local. And so I think that the companies who think that they can go it alone, that God forbid they get moved, picked up and moved somewhere else. If you're always thinking that that's going to be the case and you got to insulate yourself, you're missing out on this opportunity to enrich the community with your presence too. Because if you've got, like for us, 7,000 employees that can tell our story, what about the 2 million, in the greater Kansas City area? 2 million is a bigger number.
Yeah.
So let's empower those guys too. So I think it's that idea of, focus on your workforce as a whole, but also find the character and also go beyond your own walls. I mean, because if you start talking about turning, choirs into preachers at that point, that's a big choir.
Number. Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly why you guys have got this national attention, because you've embraced that local megaphone to help broadcast this message.
Yeah, I mean, if someone came up to you and said, "Oh, you live in Kansas City. I just read this story about Children's Mercy in Popular Science. Sounds like they're pretty cool." And you're like, "Yeah, they're all right."
Yeah.
Well, then, like, if the PR guy is the only one telling the great story, and employees and people around town and neighbors and spouses are all kind of like, "Yeah, they're all right," well, then suddenly the whole story falls flat.
Yeah.
But if it's an authentic story and everyone around believes in it, and then you're like, "Wow, I haven't read that. Can I check that out, man?" I'll have, because they do great work. Let me tell you my own story. Then suddenly that is amplified and people leave there being like, "Wow, everybody." It's kind of like, I remember going to Boston the first time, and this was back when the Royals were horrible. So I'm so glad we're not. But like everybody in Boston was wearing a Red Sox cap. And that just wasn't happening here in town. Now, everywhere you go, everyone's wearing a Royals cap, and so despite, the record, or despite last night's extra innings loss, everyone is proud to be rocking the blue, rocking their Royals hat, and it just becomes contagious. That doesn't just have to be for a sports team. Make people be that contagious about Burns and Mac, about AMC theaters, and so it's just things like that where I think we need to celebrate our Kansas City companies and our roots. So
awesome. Well, thank you for sharing your story, and thanks for stretching yourself on that too, because I love the 6 tips you gave, but the 3 other ones at the end, they're definitely for me and our team. I can see places now where I need to go back and reconsider some of the stories that we're telling, and the way we embrace Kansas City. But as we wrap this up, I always ask the question, who are you influenced by in the region and then worldwide?
Sure. So I think, and I thought about this question. I'm glad you asked, because I steal good energy and ideas from a ton of people. So I kind of broke them up in a couple different categories. So for one thing, like the guy who got me started with social is not someone who you'll find on the, speaker circuits or things like that, but he was a buddy of mine at Garmin, still a good friend of mine. Now he's at VML doing amazing things there. Ryan Ressler is his name. I'll give him a shout out.
We'll give him a link.
At Ressler. Yeah, exactly. But he's the one who really introduced me to social and the power of, look at this reach that you've got, and the idea that you can talk to so many people, but more important, talk to one person. And so he was the one, again, before I even knew how to look for my own mentions and everything, he was the one who was saying, this guy just asked a great question, or this guy had a great criticism, because criticism can be great. And so we would respond, and that's when we started getting that traction with, and that reputation for, answering everybody. And so he's just always seems to be focused on help, not sell, sell. But then you turn into, if you help right, you're going to sell. As far as this blend that I'm in now of communications plus community, and the idea that, the rising tide lifts all ships, Steve Doyle over at Hallmark is a great mentor. Again, a name that you may not come to mind when you're thinking of our big communications gurus around town. And yet to see him walk around the halls of Hallmark, everybody knows him, everybody smiles when he walks by. At chamber meetings, everybody's so glad when he walks in the room. Eric Morgenstern's the same type of thing, Morningstar Communications. Clint Robinson, he's on the government side at Black and Veatch, but he also expands beyond just thinking, this is my role, into how can I tell this story to a wider audience. Locally, Boulevard does a great job of, and everybody's always like, well, that's beer, it's easy.
No, it's not.
But you also get a lot of criticism, right? And so Julie Weeks, Jeremy Danner over at Boulevard do this great job of living and breathing their brand, and by empowering their fans to be even louder, to amplify their advocates. And I think that that's a great way to do it. Looking outside of Kansas City, I love how Cliff Bar and Camelback, because I still, even though I'm no longer in the outdoor industry, technically,
it's part of your blood.
I'm still tied. Yeah, exactly. I still love those guys. But what I love about them is they sell you the lifestyle and show you how their product can be a part of it, rather than sell you a bunch of features.
Yep.
And so all of those things, if you take that little sphere of influence, and again, I've got another dozen for each one of those, but those are the folks who, when I think about my biggest lessons learned over the last, several years, a lot of my Centurions friends, the Chamber of Commerce program, they're another one who kind of shaped me in the idea of make PR authentic, because if it's BS, somebody will shoot through it in a second.
Yeah.
All those people kind of bundle up, and you're just like, all right, now here you go and do the right thing, say the right story, and people will want to advocate for you.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a great show.
Yeah, it's been fun.
I took over 30 minutes, but it's good. I think it's going to turn out great. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, no, thank you. I was going to say, we could sit here and talk all day.
Yeah, let's do part 2 after your
exactly.
Twitter chat today.
All right, sounds good. No, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.